Spinning the hits. The host with the most. Number one with the most. And we are the Coalition, loud and proud. Oh. All right, we got a lot of feedback. Luis, do you have your speakers on, or?
Yeah, sorry, but let me. Again, I was just waiting. I forgot to.
Yep, no worries. Are you listening through headphones, or you should be listening probably through headphones? I'll tell you where to get a cool set just like ours. So you can be a radio personality. And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. If you're just listening, we had an informative hour and a half or so with candidate Phil Gray. He is one of several candidates running for the nomination of the Libertarian Party for the presidency of these United States. Very provocative differences from his approach to other libertarians. PhilGray2020.org is where you can find out more of him. We need to explore options. As a body politic, there are simply not enough. We are being spoon-fed a handful, and everything else is dangerous. In the words to the great Dana Carvey, wouldn't be prudent. So, joining us, he is now a routine repeat offender on the Coalition, is a good friend of mine, and who's someone who ran for the governorship of the great state of Rhode Island in Providence Plantations. Of course, I'm talking to Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz. Dr. Munoz, welcome back to the show. How are you tonight?
Thank you for having me. I'm well, Pat. How are you?
I am the embodiment of the American dream. That's what I'll say. All right. But hey, I'm gigging on a late night radio talk show host. It is about Eastern time, about 10:20 at night. So if you happen upon this on the Facebook, all you got to do, just like when you call the big boys like WPRO or WHJJ, or, well, let's just say WPRO. All right. So anyway, sorry, got a cheap shot out there. But the is you call the phone number up on the screen, 401-205-3738. Occasionally, I look to my left where there's a bank, a sophisticated bank of satellite equipment, surface-to-air missiles. I share this bunker with, of course, the late, great Spiro Agnew and Dick Cheney, other great vice presidents. So if we're going to publicize this, I'm going to ask super producer Joel to share this on a couple pages. Dr. Munoz, if you could as well. We're going to try tonight.
What's the phone number, Pat?
401-205-3738. I got to get me one of those 1950s, where they sing the jingle on the big 401-205-3738. Of course, maybe we could do it punk rock style or death metal style. Either way, we need a jingle here. So if anyone out there wants to, whoever hears this wants to give us a jingle, please do. We will reward you with primetime coverage on the newest player, actually the only other player, the first new player in a long time, Luis, to Rhode Island Talk Radio. Independent talk radio is something that appears in certain ways to be disappearing, if you will, from the national conversation. Kind of a play on words there. So let's start the review then. Since we've last talked, we've had a handful more of, if you will, Ms. Raimondo standing on the balcony, if you will, issuing her edicts to the people. I think we last spoke right before the weekend. What's your take? Are things getting better, getting worse? I'll just provoke you a little bit. She did come out and announce. It was almost as if, by the way, I just got to throw this in there, and I'll actually again let you respond. I got to throw this in there. It was almost as if she listened to your conversation when she announced, in the way she announced, that they were opening up a testing center, at least somewhat, in the city, the real city, the urban core. What do you think?
Yeah.
What's your take?
Well, look, the administration is hearing us, right? I mean, whether they're acting, I mean, they're not necessarily acting on what they're hearing, right? So the kind of solution that was offered by the administration, I think, was very temporary. When I've been talking about sustainable community health infrastructure because we're going to be confronting this virus easily for 12 months, and in a worst case scenario for a couple of years if the first vaccine doesn't prove to be effective. And so when we're thinking about sustainable community health infrastructure and testing sites being one of those things, placing a testing site in an elementary school, is not a long-term solution. So that may be a short-term fix to try to address the kind of public perception challenges that this administration will eventually face and is already starting to face, especially within the Latino community. But again, it's not a long-term fix. I have seen in the past few days the administration mobilize their community health or community, I would say, advocates. There are specific individuals within the Latino community that have worked with this administration and are starting to suddenly pop out from the shadows and to begin to advocate and promote how great the administration's doing. My concern with that level of political gaming now is that it diminishes, right, the importance of what we're talking about. When I say we, it's myself and it's a group of community leaders that have stood beside me in the past 2 weeks and have really been advocating for improvements in transportation, specifically a transportation system around testing, both getting to testing sites as well as mobile vehicles to get to vulnerable populations, expanding testing sites in terms of having more than one location that's within walking distance, right? And that it has some legitimate infrastructure, not just, cloth tents. And additionally, translation and interpretation services. Pat, you're an open borders guy, right? I mean, we have an immigrant population in Rhode Island. We have families that are undocumented, and we have families that struggle with the English language. And we have technologies that can be easily utilized to help those populations. But, having the technology and using it are two different things. And we've seen what those differences are as it relates to this administration. And so we've been calling for greater use of translation and interpretation services at every level of government related to the COVID-19 response, from the phone calls and hotlines, right up to the testing sites, right up to any type of coordinated care that needs to happen for transportation, as well as in the hospital systems. People are dying alone, right? The last thing we want is for them to not only die alone, but that their last words not even be understood by healthcare and the healthcare advocates that are within the system. So these are all important things. And frankly, I see them as human things and values that we should all, hope to, carry forth and translate into legitimate solutions, compassionate solutions. Beyond those things, Pat, and kind of trying to summarize everything for you, I do want to point out that all of this, talk, we realize is insufficient. And so we've band together, myself and community leaders and organizations, and we have put out a petition, Demand Health Equity. It's Rhode Island Demand Health Equity, Survive COVID-19. And again, the purpose of that petition is to really provide a context of an understanding of that there are these social determinants of health and disparities like health education, economic disparities that have kind of created a seeding ground for COVID-19 to more easily spread. And so after providing that context, we present the 3 solutions that I've discussed in a kind of bullet form so that the community can kind of understand what's going on, get educated within a single page, and also be empowered to engage in the process, to sign the petition, and to call on our leaders to actually get something done. Because, the administration loves to say, let's get it done. Well, let's get it done with COVID-19. And, we have to do much more than we've done so far.
When you look at these vast expenditures, the most notorious one, of course, being the convention center. I'm a free market guy. At this moment in history, though, unfortunately, barriers, and I'm not asking for a comment on this, kind of my opinion, I'm throwing this out there, I believe it to be the truth, that barriers created by the government in the past have served to create barriers to entry by for-profit, free market individuals who might have provided alternative medical care. Didn't happen. So here we are at this moment in history. So the state, in its role, somewhat self-imposed, as the primary responder to a natural disaster like this, has decided to just throw money at temporary hospital solutions, many of which were ill thought out of way from the quote-unquote hot zones, and yet also represent a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah,
the money I actually have a question here. The money that would have been spent, that was spent on the convention center, what kind of facility could have been put? And by the way, and I just also have to comment, what are we doing putting it in a school? For the love of God, half of Providence are abandoned buildings. You're going to put it in a school? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, what happens if, in fact, there is an attempt to reconstitute some type of school year, whether it be late spring and summer, and we're looking for facilities? You just set one up as a hospital when we've got, ready for this, all over Providence, in Pawtucket, we've got 2 abandoned hospitals that could be utilized as, getting crazy here, you ready for this? Hospitals.
Yeah. Right. Well, let's talk about the numbers. Let's talk about the industry, and then let's just frankly talk about what people need, what the community needs. So, in terms of the numbers, you know me, Pat, I like to really spread the blame equally, because we have even politicians that people get along with not doing enough. So we have Senator Whitehouse, Senator Reid, and they have brought millions in for the defense industry, right, in the past. And yet for community health during the COVID-19 crisis, we get 7.25 million. And that's for community health infrastructure across several different health systems, right? That's not just one city or one town. And that number may seem big, but in terms of healthcare expenditures, it is not big. And relative to what they brought in for defense purposes, it is a drop in the bucket. And so what is going on? Why isn't our federal delegation bringing more money in during this crisis so that we can provide more investments for community health? Second, the administration is willing to, again, pay $300,000 a month, right, for the convention center. Quote me if I'm wrong, Pat. Or correct me if I'm wrong. Is correct? It's $300,000.
It's either $300,000 or $400,000. A whole lot of money.
Okay, right, and that's only the convention center. And there's a 30-day period where they can get out of that contract, but it's not likely that they're going to execute that. And so they're going to lock in, for about 3 months at a minimum. And you look at that $900,000. So my point is, we have easily $1.2 million going into these temporary sites that are really built in a way to barely support people. Really, it's barely support people, right? You're giving beds so that the health system's not overwhelmed. You're putting oxygen tanks, masks, and you're trying your best to staff it. But that's not a level 1 trauma. That's not an intensive care unit that you would have in Rhode Island Hospital, right? It's nothing. It's nothing like that. So again, we're spending $1.25 million. We've only been given $7.25 million by our federal delegation, and then the question becomes, when the governor takes out another $300 million, in debt for the state to address the economic losses, like where's our value system in this crisis? Where is it? Where is it? The economy is struggling. Families are struggling. I get it, Pat. I truly do. And honestly, I empathize with it. And my family they're all in Pawtucket. They're all in this struggle, right? But I want my family members to survive. I want Rhode Islanders to survive this crisis. And the crisis doesn't end in 2 weeks. It ends when we get a vaccine, when we get an antiviral therapy that's effective. And so until that point, unless we start really in making the necessary investments in community health and expanding these testing sites, I feel like the administration is going to predispose our communities to harm. In the context of this virus, it's to harm. So that's the number. what's complicated about the healthcare industry is Memorial Hospital should be open. I would say, could there be a barrier, even if this administration wanted to open Memorial Hospital and negotiating what that would look like? Yeah, I mean, CEOs of hospitals, especially private ones, I mean, they certainly can make things complicated, and they are looking for profit at times. But to create a triage respiratory site in the parking lot of Memorial Hospital, it's almost, I mean, it's kind of a slap in the face to residents in Pawtucket. It makes absolutely no sense that you would entertain a business negotiation for a parking lot and not entertain what it would be like to bring the hospital up to speed, at least during this crisis.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, and that's the problem with government policy reacting to crises. So much money is wasted, so much effort is wasted in the heat of the moment. Again, to a certain age group, I'll say, "Come on, Judy, let's do a show." It looks like you care. There's this need to appear like you're doing something. And nothing stirs the emotions more. I can remember this during the height of the refugee crisis down on our borders with Mexico, where the government was doing something. We had no idea what it was. We had no idea if it was a good something. We had no idea what the end goal was. We had no idea what the budget was. But damn it, they're doing something. As opposed to, and this is my first year, I'm going to ask you a question about public health. And it's an unfair question because it's about government public health. But I don't have the answer to this, and I'm desperate to know it. We have got a very expensive public health administration that is a significant part of our budget. We have lots of poobahs down there, highly paid, highly competent. I'm sure they're wonderful people. I'm sure they've got great degrees. And they're all planner and project managers and all that. I go back to the Fine administration as the health director, if you will, for the state. And there was always this, I believe, and if I'm wrong, someone please correct me, I believe Dr. Fine was there at the height of the Ebola crisis. And we had planning and we had drills. And we went to conferences and read white papers. I just get the feeling that right now we're flying at the seat of our pants in terms of what I'll call the bricks and mortar, if you will, response to this. Just kind of throwing crap up against the wall and seeing if it works, as opposed to having developed. I mean, it's too late for a lot of this. That's the thing. I mean, so is it Monday morning quarterback? Yeah. And too bad.
Well, look, but look, Pat. I mean, you brought up Dr. Fine, so I just want to introduce this. Even in Central Falls, and I grew up in Central Falls. I graduated Central Falls High School. Their family, their friends there, some family and friends there. Certainly, a lot of friends. Dr. Fine has been doing a lot of work for the health, to build out those health centers or the health center. And yet I'm hearing commentary from residents there that the official policy, I'm not talking about whether there's an exception to the policy, right? I'm saying the official policy is that if you're not a member of the health center, you can't get testing there. So we're talking about an entire initiative that was built on accessibility, not only within walking distance, but in terms of policy, right? The accessibility of a community to health measures, especially preventive health measures, and even something that's been lifted up by the state as the beacon of light for the future by a physician who's advocated for single payer system, still has programmatic challenges. And what I don't understand is why we're not moving faster. We're easily a month into this becoming a concerning situation for this administration and citywide administrators, and that policy hasn't changed. I mean, I find that, disheartening. It's just, it doesn't make any sense from a programmatic standpoint, but just from a personal standpoint, coming from healthcare, coming from that city, like what's going on?
Right. Folks, if you're just joining us, Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz is here on the line. He's a former candidate to be governor of this great state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. Public health policy is his passion. He is intimately involved in startups involving, ironically, talk about timing, supply chains in the medical health in the healthcare system across America. And so as a result, being a lifelong Rhode Islander, He brings a unique perspective and expertise to questions surrounding COVID. Now, we do have open lines, 401-205-3738. This is the first time we're going to be trying to accept calls while we've got a guest in the air. This is a relatively new effort if you're just joining us. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media. We broadcast on the Facebook, which is why you're probably seeing us. We also are on coalitionradionetwork.com, kind of a new kind of bare bones website. Acts like sort of like a television station to the type of programming we put here. We've had Dr. Muniz on a handful of times. We're going to continue to have him on. But hopefully, folks in the community, if you've got questions or comments, want to hurl brickbats, as they say, wants to call balderdash on the whole thing, feel free to call us at area code 401-205-3738. Today's press conference, what was, I know that you watched that like a hawk. I know that you put questions in at times or along with other indie media types. What came out of today's press conference as far as you're concerned? Can you hear us, Dan?
So I can hear you. So outside of all the repetition, showing graphs and numbers and continuing to say that they are the only source of valid information, which I completely disagree with that. Really, the new thing was opening up the economy, right? Like this, what will it take to open up the economy? But one thing that stood out in that description of what it would look like to open up the economy, Mike, I had some concerns with one point. There was a lot of responsibility placed on business owners to rethink how they can conduct their businesses in a safe way to protect not only their employees, but their customers. And the reason I'm saying that I'm concerned, Pat, is, we have an administration that has talked about being tech savvy. We've seen issues with that. We have an administration that's talked about having these great directors and all the collaboration and cross collaboration that happens between departments. And yet I don't understand why this phrase has not been mentioned by this administration. It's prevention by design or safety by design. And so the whole concept of that is that in the event that you have any type of potential disaster that you can foresee, whether natural or otherwise, you build something, right, to survive that disaster, right, to be sustainable. In this case, the disaster is COVID-19, right? It's a public health crisis. And Commerce, Rhode Island, Mr. Pryor, right, should be connecting with the DOH, and there should be active work going into establishing business guidelines for the restaurant industry, for other industries, manufacturing. I mean, manufacturers already have pretty stringent guidelines. So outside of some distancing, that might be a little easier. But for the restaurant industry, I think that those businesses and even nail salons, they need a lot of support, like concrete step-by-step support. Essentially, the Department of Health translating their public health guidelines with the Department of Commerce into infrastructure changes that those businesses need to make. So maybe a restaurant needs to cut off the kitchen staff from the server staff completely. Maybe there can't be really any risk of physical contact. These things, these are measures already taken if you were working in a stage 4 viral laboratory. But now they have to be, kind of converted into your standard protocol for a restaurant. It's just the world we live in. But the average person can't be expected to understand that and then to move quickly on that. I mean, the Commerce, Rhode Island, and the DOH need to work together and get these materials out there. Because if you truly want this economy to open up, which I don't think we're ready to do that from a community health standpoint yet, but if we do, we also need to make sure these businesses aren't going to get shut down for seeding the virus and promoting its spread. So we need to make sure that the businesses have all the tools they need to help us keep this virus at bay and reduce risk to customers and their employees.
No, that's an outstanding point. Anyone who's watched Bar Rescue or, if there's any of these restaurant rescue programs, and I'm trying to inject a little humor into this, but there's actually a serious point here. We've all learned about Safe Serve and Food Safe and all the different certifications that have taken place. We all now understand that opening a restaurant and having a kitchen that serves food to the public is a tremendously complex enterprise. So that a lot of the folks who are chefs and the entrepreneurs who are running these businesses. And by the way, Rhode Island has an outstanding safety record for public health, given the diversity, the wide-ranging reach of our hospitality industries here in the state. They have an outstanding record in the past of doing that, just keeping people safe from the food they buy. And, that covers all sorts of economic grounds, from the fanciest French restaurant to the newest Southeast Asian or Southwest Asian food truck. So the notion that all of a sudden we could just wake up one day and say, okay, let's do a show, and the notion that simply putting a mask on will prevent the possibility of food being a mechanism to be making essentially COVID a foodborne mechanism, just because of unfamiliarity. I don't want to use anything else other than unfamiliarity in a restaurant and a hospitality industry that's got a great track record here for individual responsibility by entrepreneurs of literally every background is idiotic. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that. There are too many I wouldn't have thought of that haven't taken place. And again, you'll hear my mantra to the good doctor is that, since government's sort of taking control of this, we've been left with nothing but government to respond to it. Has anyone posited that question to Ms. Raimondo?
I don't know if anyone's asked the governor the question, but, I think there's been, let me bring entrepreneurship into this, independent of whether they're Democrat or Republicans, there are governors out there that are taking more kind of an entrepreneurial approach to sourcing medical supplies. And so this administration has recently more and more been displacing a lot of accountability on the federal government. And the way I see it is this: the federal government did screw up on multiple levels. I mean, we're talking not only from the executive branch, but we're talking commissioned directors that were part of leading health organizations that even in late January, early February, were saying that we shouldn't be concerned. And those same officials did not tell the public that the public should be wearing masks until, even, a few weeks after that. So there have been issues, and frankly, there have been a lot of mistakes made. But removing the federal government for a moment, let's also focus on the states. If the states have the authority today to open and close the economy, if the states have the authority today to source supplies independent of the federal government from another country, then they also had that 3 weeks ago. And so to say that any delays or any challenges that they're facing today is the federal government, it's not. It's frankly their inability to execute on medical supplies within the supply chain. And one of the things that's been brought up recently is that the federal government's requisitioning, essentially they're stopping all the supplies that are coming in and taking it, essentially redirecting it to areas that they think are in greater need. But Illinois' governor recently showed that, if you understand supply chain and you take a couple of alternative flights, you can bypass the federal government and at least its ability to confiscate your personal protective equipment. So there is something about having the kind of business savvy and creativeness that comes with entrepreneurship and then applying it in a government capacity to helping the public. And so my point, Pat, is I understand that your doctrine is that government often messes things up. But in this case, there was still a path that this administration could have been taking to make our response faster and I think more effective earlier on in terms of trying to contain this virus.
Absolutely. I'll agree with you 100% on that. Now, let's play Monday morning quarterbacks just a little bit. Do you think that failure to do so, and listen, I'm going to give you one or two choices. There's probably 100 choices, probably a mixer. Was it incompetence word's too strong, even though I just put it out there. Was it arrogance? Was it confusion? Was it just inexperience? Again, this is at a level right now, regardless of what all the what did you call it? The internet epidemiology. You came up with a great term. All the medical experts and epidemiology, the internet epidemiologists. Is there now a online course where you can take?
Yeah, I mean that it is right. I mean, honestly, we just live in an age where you have, Facebook doctorates, Twitter doctorates, internet epidemiologists. Everyone is an expert, and look, I don't want to diminish the ability of a person to learn and to learn quickly, but your sources need to be appropriate, and I think you need to apply the skills for some time. So I just want to back that comment up a little, Pat, but. Do I think it was arrogance, or do I think that it was fear, or do I think that it was a number of other things? We're all humans. I don't want to discount that there was fear. Even Charlie Baker. I mean, you saw there was a moment when he received the mask from the Patriots, and he almost had he almost had a bit of a breakdown there. He almost cried, and I think that was really an indication that his emotions probably were everywhere. He was probably overwhelmed. He probably wasn't sleeping much. He was probably afraid. And frankly, I think that there are plenty of political leaders out there that may regret those few days in which they hesitated. And the hesitation of 2 or 3 days may not have led, one infection to be 1,000, but that hesitation could have actually had a huge impact on delays in supply chain, because by the time everyone stopped hesitating, they all jumped into supply chain and started bidding against one another. And that led easily to a week or 2 weeks of just pure bidding wars that were going on. So that's what, I think that leaders that, were afraid and did hesitate, at least those that are compassionate, are going to have some level of regret. Now, the person or the leader that's out there that's not regretful despite the hesitation, now that's the person that I would start to think as to whether there was some arrogance there.
Are you talking about a president?
Yeah, a little bit of everything, right? But it's with this administration, I guess my concern, and what makes me feel like it's at a minimum overly confident, is in the beginning, a day before they close these schools down, Pat, before they close the schools down, the governor said, and I mean, I remember my hair stood up, that children, it's okay if they get it. It'll kind of be a little like, the flu, but they'll be fine. I mean, to say that
we had pictures. Remember the pictures that were floating around for about 2 days of chickenpox parties from the 60s? I mean, and which, by the way, actually happened. People brought their kids so they could get the chicken pox. People were actually floating those pictures almost sentimentally, as if that was. I got to jump in here. That and the notion that everyone is preaching, again, all the armchair epidemiologists are preaching that there exists herd immunity, as if they actually understand, because I don't understand the real technological issues or the medical issues underlying herd immunity, that you'll get herd immunity.
I can summarize it for you.
Yeah. But here's the thing. We've known each other for a couple of years now. Every time we talk, it's like sitting over a cup of coffee at the coffee exchange, which I really want to do again soon. The greatest place for coffee in the world. They're still open and they're selling coffee. No, they're not a sponsor, but you know what? A Rhode Island institution. Go out and buy some damn coffee at the coffee exchange. At the intersection of Wickenden and that really hoity-toity street with the gas lights and everything. Benefit Street, yeah. I'm allowed there once a year. It's right near RISD. It is one of the institutions that makes Rhode Island great. So go out and buy some damn coffee tomorrow. Anyhow, I'm sorry. I digress as always. So our conversations usually descend into sheer chaos, and they last hours at a time. So anyway, go back to the original point.
Well, herd immunity, right? So ideally, when you look at herd immunity, the idea is, can you get to such a high percentage of the population being immune to a certain condition that essentially it just denotes all, like it equates to the possibility that you have all immunity. So for instance, if 97% of the population had a vaccine to measles, then the percentage that doesn't have the vaccine is so low that the impact it would have on the larger population is just too minimal to even qualify as being, significant public health issue. And so that's with vaccines, and that's I didn't talk about, it wasn't technical jargon I was throwing out. So if there are scientists listening, I'm happy to have the technical conversation with you. But one of the things that people are saying, Pat, and this is a little technical, is what I just said there, some people would disagree with. And then, so let's talk about that. They would say, well, it doesn't have to be 97%. It doesn't have to be 90%. In fact, it may only have to be 60%. So the idea is the entire population doesn't always travel. Many people are kind of isolated within their communities. Not everyone goes out. Some people have social phobias. I mean, just a number of reasons why people that live in rural America obviously won't interact with as many people that live in New York City, for instance. And so if you can get 60% of the population that either has a vaccine or that has been infected and survived the infection and built up an immunity to it, then perhaps if that 60% of the population are mostly the people that are traveling around and interacting with people in LA and New York City, then frankly, your risks are low, because everyone else that doesn't have immunity, well, they don't really interact with many people. They may exist in these different pockets, and so we would generally be safe. So some people are saying that. Where I disagree with that premise or with that idea is that 60% of the population having immunity would be maybe okay if this virus was not highly transmissible. So if the virus really, if one person only infected one person, if that was the trend, if there was no airborne component to it, if it was just contact, then maybe 60% would be enough, right, for the world to not be on lockdown right now. But the transmission of this virus is much greater than that. So we know that one person is likely to infect 3 people. Right. And then so we know that out of those 3 people, so think about the person that infected the other 3. So out of every 4 people, one person is asymptomatic but still infected, right? Infectious. So in science, they call that like the rho. So the governor the other day mentioned rho. So if you don't know what rho means, it's just an index. We extract a number that essentially equates to the infection rate. And then we use that number to try to piece together this puzzle of COVID-19. So right now, the infection rate is high, Pat. So if 60% of the population were immune, but the infection rate's still this high that we're seeing it, between 3 and 4, then that other 40% of the population has something to worry about. Therefore, our country would have something to worry about because we have 330 million people here. So I hope that provided some summary about the kind of debate around herd immunity. My perspective is if vaccines are pursuing 97%, then we should really look towards those high numbers of immunity, not the 60%, because this disease is just too infectious. It's too infectious.
Right. And if you could, I mean, again, not an expert, just play one on the radio. The Ebola, which is always been the gold standard for horror, just because of the way the symptoms evidence themselves. Is it my understanding, am I correct in saying that the way it's transmitted is almost purely by human contact? Is that correct? Oh, did we lose you here?
No, sorry, okay. I put myself on mute. Pat. I just didn't want I didn't want you to echo.
Step away from the mute button. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I was asking about Ebola, which, as I mentioned, is sort of the gold standard for horrific diseases, just based on the way it evidences itself. Or I want to sound like a doctor-like. The way it presents itself, is that more doctor-like? Do I sound more intelligent that way?
Well, look, Ebola kills 9 out of 10 people, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, so the mortality rate with Ebola, it literally liquefies every organ in your body.
That
So that's
sucks.
a different disease. And yes, it is contact based. And that's the only reason we're all alive. Because if it weren't, we would we would be cavemen and cavewomen and cave everyone again. Uh,
Right.
so so in any case, this particular virus, SARS-CoV-2, we know that it is spread through droplets, and so those droplets, the heavy droplets that come out of our respiratory tract as we talk, as we breathe, sneeze, cough, all that, they land. So the big drops land, and when they land, we know that the virus survives longer on metal, on like metal surfaces that aren't exposed to outside environments. It can last up to 15 days. That's at least was what they saw on the cruise ships. We also know that it can last up to a day on plastic. And we know that even on hands, it can last for several minutes, right? So frequent hand washing, that's why they're saying it's important, and washing all of your products when you go shopping, that's why it's important. And then keeping your house clean in terms of metal surfaces, and certainly being cognizant of when you touch metal surfaces when you're outside. Like, so all this is why it's all important. But what my point is that we use the term contact because of these heavy droplets that fall, and then we touch it, and then we bring our hands up to our face, and of course our face is connected to our upper respiratory airways, right? So our nose, our sinuses. If the virus infects those cells die, and when they die, gravity pulls them down into our lungs, and then boom, the infection hits our lungs and then enters our entire system, and we're seeing not only lung issues, which is the primary cause of death, but we are seeing other organ systems issues. And so that's a summary of the virus. But I want to talk about contact and how it gets into the body. But we also need to be aware that this has shown signs of being airborne. So airborne doesn't mean it's born in the air. Just need to mention that. But when we're speaking, there are different size of little kind of water bubbles, air droplets, right? Or droplets that are being projected out. The smaller they are, the longer they can float in the air. And within those droplets, there's virus. If you're an infected person, the viral particles are within that droplet. And there have been enough studies about just air droplets, like when you speak, how far they can go, and when you sneeze, how far it can go. And 6 feet, if someone sneezes directly at you and you're 6 feet away, some of those droplets can still reach you. The invisible, really small micro ones. So if you don't have a mask on, if they don't have a mask on, 6 feet wouldn't protect you in that scenario. There have been some studies in a closed environment, Pat, that show that the virus can actually exist in air droplets and survive. So something is mostly airborne, not only when it can travel, but when it can travel and live in that air bubble for enough time to get inhaled, right, by someone else and to get into their lungs. And so that's why there is an air, and there's enough data to show that this is an airborne virus. And my concern is that the CDC already had some basic studies early on, and I think that we should have been warning the public about the possibility, and at least educating the public and promoting the use of some form of facial protection. A scarf is not really going to protect you much, but it's better than nothing. Basic procedure mask, not the N95s, but the basic procedure mask. In terms of how many masks there are in the world and nationally, there wasn't a deficiency in the supply of basic procedure masks. So I just think that our leaders should have considered unique ways of handling that. Even if every citizen were given one with a protocol on how to clean it and how to use it, I think, to the credit of all the residents in the U.S., I think that, we would have been equipped with enough of a baseline set of skills to take that mask and use it responsibly, as long as there was some guidance. But there's been failure of, from the federal government in terms of guidance. And frankly, here in Rhode Island, there's been a failure of outreach materials to the residents. The press conferences alone are insufficient. I'm surprised they haven't just put steps, 1 through 10, how to put on and use a mask, and sent it through mail to every person in the state. I mean, that's real responsiveness in a crisis like this.
Yeah, and even something as simple as to where to buy. It's you've got all these people improvising with clearly unpredictable results. And yet there exist supplies, if you will, of masks, basic masks. Some people seem to have them, some people don't. How is it that 6 weeks into this, we haven't figured out a way for the general public, and I know there's shortages, but the general public to at least buy, or Christ, with the amount of money they just wasted in the convention center, be given some masks. I mean, even latex gloves.
I mean, look, the mask. Yeah, Pat, you know how much each mask costs? If you're talking wholesale medical supply, 55 cents. And
Wow.
yet we have residents here in the state that are having to pay $6 for a basic procedure mask. And so on every level, if the state does not want to see price gouging, if the state wants to protect its citizens, if the state wants to inform and empower residents to take it upon themselves to, adhere to these public health measures, would 55 cents really have, in the scheme of this crisis, right? Would 55 cents really have hurt the state of Rhode Island?
Not thinking so much.
I mean,
I just, all I need to do, and if there's someone out there who can give me the number because it's late and I don't remember the number, so I apologize for that. But all you have to do is cut in half the budget to run the state legislature, and we're all set. It really is that simple. That might mean less.
It's not like they're active at this point, right?
Right, because God knows they're in hiding.
Yeah.
They're in the. I think a few of them may have snuck into this bunker. I mean, all you have to do. I mean, yes, does that mean an end to the shrimp cocktails in the Pernod? Yes, it does. Does that mean an end to the little bottles of cans of Coke that they hand out late at night? Well, everybody's been sitting there waiting to testify for 4 freaking hours while some specialist bloviates. Yes, it might, but the money's there. That again, that's undeniable that the money exists in Rhode Island state government through the confiscatory taxes of the state to have essentially thrown a money bomb at it. Would that have meant cutting other unnecessary nonsense in the state? Yes, it would. But the money's there. And again, I look out in astonishment at a governor who demands and requires masks. Okay, let's be an adult. I get the reason why. But I can't buy them. What happens if I take another one of these, invented, basically glorified dish cloth mask, create a mask out of it like I see so many people doing. And then I walk into my house and bring it into my house from where it's been out in the general public. If according to public knowledge now, again, from all the armchair experts, you see all these great graphics of the spread of every time Pat, collapses into a coughing fit because of his allergies. Again, it's the simple stuff. It's the basics. It's just
right.
So much of this is common sense, isn't it?
I mean, it is, but it's not only common sense. I mean, there's a level of discipline, and I think that like any new skill that you're picking up that requires practice, having practice materials certainly helps you. Pick up the skill faster and to acquire the necessary discipline to improve your skills over time. And so what I'm saying is, the press conferences alone, giving these small bits of information is not the appropriate. It's a single channel, and it's not the appropriate way to help Rhode Island residents understand what they need to do, how to effectively do it, and to support them with the materials that they would need. So for instance, if you have just told those that are watching the press conference, and not everyone does, that's another issue, but for those watching, if you just told them that 500 people had been confirmed with COVID in a single day and 17 have died, and then you tell them, oh, hey, remember to put your mask on, what do you think is going to be the first and last thing on their mind from that press conference? It's going to be the number of infected new cases, and the last thing probably whether they knew of anyone that died. So we need another medium to this administration needs to consider how it's going to create another channel of outreach to inform the public and keep the public kind of growing and evolving with this crisis and aware of how they need to use a mask. So we have people on the national level there that started to speak out and say the mask actually will make you spread the disease more, and that statement is not an appropriate statement. It's the misuse of a mask that may lead you to acquire the infection because you're touching the outside of the mask where all those droplets landed, and then your hand has the virus, and then you touch your face, right? So we can't give up on people, and I feel like it almost seems like it's all like the administration is, and frankly just people in general at this point and the national level, are willing to assume that the public doesn't want to be helped, and that's wrong. I mean, the public not only wants to be helped, but the public needs materials. I mean, they need brokers. I mean, we've done these things every time there's a parade in Providence or whatever, right? Like there's flyers going out all the time. I don't see why we're not doing it now that there's a public health crisis.
Right, because you can't assume everyone has the net. Now, we're about to take a very important moment in Coalition Talk Radio history. So for folks who are just watching for the first time, this is obviously, we had to accelerate this out the door given the equipment necessary and the approaching, if you will, crisis. So we've phased a lot of the things in by sense. So I've got a caller on the line. So what we're going to try and do is bring him on the line so that both the good doctor and I can hear him simultaneously. He can ask his question to the doctor, and we can have a little bit of a conversation. So bear with me because, we're baby steps. We're testing a lot of this technology out. So we've got a caller on the line. Hi there. Welcome to the Coalition. Your name and where are you calling from?
Hey, Pat. Hey, Doc. It's Frank here from East Bay. How are y'all?
Good. Doctor, can you hear him?
I can. How are you doing today?
Good. So you have, there we go. By the way, this is the first time we're doing this. So we have a subject matter expert on the line. We've got a citizen who wants to call with a question. Imagine that. It's a miracle. Frank, you have a question for the doctor. Go right ahead, please.
Doc, how many people die a day in Rhode Island? Do you know off the top of your head?
How many people die a day in
Today?
Rhode Island? Yeah, a day. Are you saying you're looking at some type of average?
Yeah, average, and then by year as well, if you got that.
So he's looking for sort of what is the normal death rate and you're talking about prior to the plague, right?
10-4.
Okay, so prior to the plague, do you have any handle on what the public health data was for how many people left the mortal coil, left the golden embrace of Rhode Island on a given day?
Yeah, I mean, the total death in an entire year, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I know where you're going. I would just say that I'm happy to have the discussion with you in the debate if you feel that because there's a lower amount of lives lost after we've taken extraordinary measures to prevent the loss of life, somehow that somehow that the low numbers of life lost, if you're trying to say that it shows that this crisis is not in fact a crisis because more people die to car accidents or because, more people die to heart attacks, I generally would disagree with you because because ultimately every life matters from my perspective. And I would try to, if someone had a heart attack in front of me, I wouldn't just let them go without giving them CPR. I wouldn't say, well, technically that's just one of the 20% people they may die this year for a heart attack. That's just not the way that I think. And that, that's mostly what drew me into medicine and why I took the Hippocratic Oath, right? To not think that way and to try my best to do no harm and to save as many lives as possible. But I know where you're going. I've heard the argument. Happy to hear your logic and rationale around it.
And so, Frank, what do you think?
Hey, Pat, I could not hear Doc speak.
Okay.
So that's one thing. I think I sent you a message. I wasn't able to hear. I was trying to hear on the online. That is.
Was it muffled or was it just you couldn't hear him at all?
I could not hear him at all.
Okay. All right. So,
Pat, but could you hear me, Pat?
I can hear you. Frank, Frank, can you hear him right now at all? what he just said?
No, I cannot hear him.
Okay.
I can hear you.
All right, so we've got to refine the technology then. I thought we had made a great step for mankind, and we got to go back a little to the drawing board. But Frank, all right, so I'll just so to give you a shot for your question, what he develop your point a little further, and I'll try and present it to the doctor, and then maybe you can listen to his answer online. Were you trying to draw? His response to you was that effectively, while the death rate may not have been anywhere near the extremes predicted, that in fact the fact that the deaths are occurring at all at a higher level than your typical illness require some type of serious intervention. But what are your thoughts? Develop them a little more, and then I'll present them to the doctor.
Yeah, no, I was just curious on the rates themselves. I haven't got them. That is nothing I take seriously. As you know me personally, there's a few things I really care about in life, and you know what those are. But back to your point, and back to Doctor's point a minute ago, what you were talking about is Rhode Island, are they sending out vote by mail, that type of stuff? Why don't they throw a face mask in there when they send out those applications to say, hey, you're going to vote by mail? Well, here you go. Here's a face mask. Use it.
Well, and that's a great idea because we're communicating with people anyway who have registered. So Dr. Minos, Frank made the suggestion. I think it's a good one. If people vote by mail, which I think is what's going to happen, and we need to just get down to it and deal with it. Send out a few face masks with each vote with, because first of all, the request is made. That means folks are still hanging in there. They're with us. And number two, there's got to be and Frank, thanks for the call. And I'm going to chat for a second. Frank. I'm going to chat with it for a second so you can listen to his response. All right, buddy?
Thank you, Frank.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to give him a chance to get back to the stream. So, but again, that points out there has one of the reasons why I believe in transparency in government is that we can sit here and talk about all the potential ways that you can distribute masks. To Frank's point, it's a great one. We don't know how much of this has been wargamed already, if you will, by the state government because they simply choose not to share that. So what happens is the conversation morphs from how, different ways to do it, and then it morphs into, part of this conversation will then end, and then there will be the cynical side of the conversation with, well, that sounds really easy. Why haven't they done it? And so if you've got a government that's transparent, they actually have an adult conversation with the citizenry, which is what needs to happen. When you can get away with hiding how awful it's going to be for a couple of weeks, people become desensitized to how awful it's going to be. Sometimes they conjure up ways in which it's going to be more awful than it really is going to be, and another portion of the population figures out all the way that they think government and the people running the situation are idiots because they haven't publicly acknowledged that they've considered how awful it's going to be. And so you have then this great mass of, the term we use in the coalition is mental masturbation, all right, over a handful of facts because the government has not shared with us exactly what they found they don't think is going to work, what they think is going to work, and what their long-term goals are. It's not like a kid. When the parents are getting divorced and they figure they can hide it from the kid for a couple of weeks, one day the parent moves out and where's daddy or mommy? Eventually all us little children out in the citizenry, we figure out something's wrong. And very often we think it's a divorce when daddy might just have gone on a business trip. Who knows? Is that a legitimate analogy? I know I kind of rambled there, but what do you think?
You're gonna have to summarize that for me, Pat. Like,
It's late. I've been talking for days.
yeah, that was like a multi-layered analogy. I mean, it wasn't really that straightforward. But listen, I think I mean, you can't divorce, if we're kind of bringing analogies in, like, you can't divorce like the economic feasibility of the solution that Frank presented with from like the ease of its execution, and I think oftentimes there's a lot of red tape in government, there's a lot of like politicians often defend themselves against solutions by saying, well, the money's not the problem, we can get the money, but it's really, well, how do we programmatically get the money to residents, or how do we make these investments, how do we choose who it is, and they develop this, it's almost a facade of ethics, right, where there needs to be this process, and the process needs to be pure, and unless we can't engage the solution. So in this case, I think there is some element of that excuse that we need to get the protective equipment primarily for healthcare workers. And I agree with that today, because I do feel that the initial responsiveness and delays in supply chain put us in a position where we did not have, and just like other states that had a delayed response, adequate amounts of personal protective equipment. So that is the situation we find ourselves in. But if we're confronting COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 for the next 2 years, that won't always be the case. And so if we know that they're going to give the convention center and every other place easily $1.2 million within just 3 months, then I don't see why it wouldn't be not only feasible, but acceptable to allocate on a wholesale purchase for basic procedure mask between $200,000 to $300,000 in order to not only acquire masks for residents of Rhode Island, especially those that may not have money to buy masks, especially at this point that the price rates are so high and the economy is doing so poorly. And then also, to Frank's point, to package it through within a vehicle that's already going to be sent out. I mean, on the whether it's mail-in ballots or the census, right? I mean, there's certainly ways that we can team the delivery of these materials to the public. I do think that I think that the administration would consider something that we're talking about here as radical. Now, I don't know why it would be radical, but I do think that when you give residents a mask and you team that with guidance brochures and ways for them to really have information at their that's accessible, where they're not going to primarily be dependent on daily press conferences where information varies and there's just too much going on. I mean, the approach I just mentioned is frankly what you do in primary care. Someone comes in and they have diabetes, they have high blood pressure, they don't have a lot of money, they're poor, and you have to sit down with them and you have to kind of create not only an understanding, but a package and a bundle of materials that you leave them with so that they can bring that home and really, be exposed to that, to see it every day so that they can try to make, the decisions that would help their diabetes and help them live a healthy life. Same thing is true with COVID-19, right, Pat? Like this is not only a lifestyle shift. I mean, it's a complete culture shift. I mean, shaking hands is probably gone forever. And so the state does, I think, need to play a more direct role in not only providing some of this protective equipment to its residents, or at least making it accessible at very discounted prices compared to the price gouging, channels that we're seeing now, but also some educational materials so that, every resident can feel empowered with like knowing what they should not be doing. And that's the most important thing in this fight against COVID-19. You have a mask. What should you not do with that mask?
Yeah, it just strikes me that these press conferences have degenerated into more and more of the same. That instead of being vehicles for which folks can find not only statuses, well, it's reflection of politics themselves. I mean, we're obsessed with statistics. We're obsessed with who's going to win, when they're going to win, how they're going to win. We're not obsessed with substance and the degree with which you could produce substance. And, instead of having Gina and the good doctor get up there and in the same flat voice, preachy voice from the governor, and the same near monotone from the good doctor, who is by all accounts a brilliant physician and obviously a relatively good administrator, how about bringing some other people in to give teaching moments to the public? All we get is this once a day recitation of those who've gone before us, and we get this recitation of the same mantra. And I get that repeating it will reinforce it. I get that. But we ain't talking multiplication tables here, are we? We're talking about a public health crisis, one which is now being seen through the prism of an economic crisis because of the lack of clear understanding by most folks about the legitimate significance and the degree of the public health crisis. Information is everything. Right now, there are too many people taking from too many sources, too many interpretations of the ferocity of this. I mean, something we haven't even talked about tonight is mutation. And the fact that there appears to be folks who, and again, whether or not this is false positives or not, folks who had the disease, were cured of the disease, now have the disease again. That doesn't sound like herd immunity to me.
Right. I mean, there's a lot, and I want to make sure that I do my best since I am on the call. And so they have seen multiple strands with small mutations. There's not enough research to show, and this is around the globe, right? From like Eastern hemisphere to Western, so we don't have enough information, and we frankly won't until it's done and we look retrospectively. We look into the past and see everyone that's kind of died and who had complications. We won't know if those mutations were associated with a different level of severity. So is the SARS-CoV-2 that we're experiencing here in the US different from the one they experienced in Italy? Or were Italians simply older in the north, and that's why they died at a mortality rate that was about 10%, which is I mean, like high. We don't know the answer to that yet, and I think it's going to take more studying and frankly more data, more information to learn that. But that's the concern of mutation, right? So in a worst case scenario, in a real kind of apocalyptic Hollywood movie, which none of us want to live, this virus would go from killing 2% of the population to killing 30%, and that would be scary, right? So a single mutation that can lead to a more severe transmission or widespread transmission, or more severe symptoms and a higher mortality rate. That's what we that would be like the worst case scenario. That's not what we're seeing. I don't want to scare anyone. You just brought up mutation, Pat. So when people bring it up and you hear these stories, a lot of the big concerns are like that scenario. But the smaller concerns are, are these small little variations in mortality rates between countries like Italy and US, are those associated with the mutation? That's a scientific question that's being asked. In terms of immunity, so we don't know if getting the virus and surviving it confers lifetime immunity, right? Will you be immune forever? Or because even the chicken pox, for the most part, not everyone that had the chicken pox, and I actually am of the generation that I had it. Not everyone gets it again, but occasionally, a very small percentage will get it again, a chicken pox, maybe later in their life. And shingles is kind of a reactivation of the chicken pox for people that are older are at higher risk, and so they also have a vaccine for that. So even diseases that we would normally say you kind of had lifetime immunity, like the chances of you getting it are kind of low. It's never perfect. It never is truly lifetime. And so putting that in the context of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19, the concerning thing is what if you're only immune for a year? That may give us more time to get a vaccine, but if we don't have a vaccine in the year, then your risk in that hypothetical, and it is a hypothetical right now, we don't have enough information, but if you were only immune for a year, then after a year, you would still be at the same risk of getting infected and of having severe symptoms as you have today. And I say risk because we don't know if you're one of the 25% of people that will be asymptomatic or not have symptoms. So you have to don't approach it as though you're one of those 25%. Approach it as though you're one of the ones that will get symptoms, and I think that will protect you by helping you make better, safer preventive measures. So that's immunity, Pat. Now what they're trying to figure out is, in South Korea, there were a few cases where people that had the virus started to have symptoms again, and they had tested them after their symptoms had subsided, and the test had come back negative. So they assumed that the virus had cleared. Now, we know that the tests aren't perfect, but the thing about South Korea that's interesting is they don't run one test. So they run 2 to 3 swab tests, in order to try to reduce the likelihood that you'll have an error, right? So if every single test, we know that there's a 30% chance that it'll tell you you're negative when you're still positive, then you run 2 or 3 to try to make sure that you overcome that error rate. So their process for testing is very good. That's my point. It's not perfect, but it's better than the one we have. And so the people had been cleared for having the infection had passed right after they were tested, before and after the infection. And suddenly they start getting symptoms again and test positive. And so the question becomes, was it an error in the test? Even though there were multiple tests taken, was there an error? So therefore, they actually never stopped being positive. That's the first question. The second, more interesting question is there really no immunity? And if there's no immunity, that's a scary situation. Or even if there is immunity, what if the immunity is kind of low? So in other words, if they had some immunity, but then they were in a hospital setting where there was a lot of that virus present, did the amount of virus that got into them overwhelm the low amount of immunity that they had? So those are two different things, but they're kind of the same in the end, right? Because ultimately what it means is you can get infected again, and your immunity, whatever you acquire, however low or high, whatever, but it's just not enough to stop the virus from infecting you again. That's the second scenario. And then the third scenario, which is not about so much immunity as it is, they call it reactivation. And so the virus, there's some studies to show that the virus even when it clears your lungs, even when your symptoms start to subside, all that mucus, all the virus, it does get refluxed back into your digestive tract. And so there's some anecdotal evidence to show that it may take about 30 days to clear your digestive tract. But when you sleep, there are a lot of ways that reactivation can present itself. So this is just one hypothetical, right? But even if you're clearing the virus, it's still in your body. So in one way or the other, if it gets back into your lungs, or generally your immune system, kind of attacks the virus again, and then you have that overreactive immune response. There's several, reactivation is a process. One is certainly that the virus somehow itself gets back into your system, causing your immune response to, react to it. And so that's essentially that's a basic way of getting towards reactivation. So that's a third idea that's out there. So far, Pat, just want to, for all the listeners that actually are up at 11:30 at night listening to heavy science stuff, we talked about mutation and some of the questions that are lingering out there and the concerns with mutated strands. We talked about immunity, whether it's conferred for a lifetime, whether it's conferred at all, even in the short term for like a year. Whether if you have immunity, it's so weak and so low that you can be reinfected, or whether there's this idea of reactivation that can take place, which is not reactivation doesn't disregard the possibility of immunity, but all it really shows is that even when you think you're getting better, the virus can elicit another immune response, and so you can start kind of getting back into some of those severe concerning symptoms. So those are all heavy science concepts, Pat. But I think the important thing is every scenario I presented there has a different path to executing a solution, right? Um, there's more urgency if we don't have immunity to get a vaccine. And frankly, there's more urgency to be really conservative about our opening up the economy. A lot of pro opening economy kind of mindsets out there are really heavily weighing on this idea that we're going to have lifetime immunity. And those are the people saying herd immunity, because herd immunity must mean lifetime immunity. And if you have lifetime immunity and herd immunity, then there's no reason our economy should be closed right now or ever get closed again. I just think there's to reach that conclusion is premature. It just from a scientific standpoint, it's premature. So I've been a proponent of being very conservative about opening up the economy and ensuring that we have adequate preventive health infrastructure to make sure that if it is the case that there's no lifetime immunity or low immunity or no immunity at all, we have a system built to take care of people and to coordinate their care fast enough to try our best to save their lives.
Wow. Well, we covered a lot of ground tonight, didn't we? Folks, we're going to try and get this back out. We're working on setting up a schedule for replays at coalitionradionetwork.com. This will be one of the key ingredients. Spent a lot of time on actual science tonight, which is something that's been largely missing from a lot of the conversation about to reopen, reclose. Hopefully the technology continues to develop in terms of cures and vaccinations and all that. But, at this point in time, I don't know. I have to agree with you. I just don't see, given the presence of these hot pockets, if you will, hot sites, hot territories, hot neighborhoods, whatever you want to call it, I just don't see how it's possible. Listen, people who know me know I'm no fan of government, but at this point, the question has to be discussed in a non-emotional environment, if that's at all possible, is what is it right to do on a health basis? And the trouble is, you've got a lot of people out there who are extremely frustrated. Don't blame them. I'm in the same boat. I'm unemployed. I got laid off just like the rest of the folks. But because of the way that the governor has characterized a response and being very authoritarian, but to me, it's the worst of all worlds. It's a highly authoritarian response in the absence of clear science being discussed. And that's the worst of all worlds, because one breeds, if you will, hostility. The second portion, where we're not discussing, is sharing with adults the real issues, that breeds cynicism. Mix hostility and cynicism, and that's not a great recipe for right now. So then people look answers elsewhere, and again, we get into the conversation of what is the truth? Are there any absolute truths? Of course there are. Does science mean anything anymore? Of course it does. Because science doesn't meet your narrative, doesn't mean, again, as someone said, and someone should tell me who said it, maybe you're entitled to your own opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. And that's what we've got going on here. And I just believe it's the arrogance of this particular administration that thinks that people are going to endlessly say, okay, because you say it so, it must be true. Even if it in fact is true. We're only seeing selected bits, if you will, of the movie. And folks are losing patience because the economic reality of this is brutal. Generational businesses are closing. Wonderful parts of our life are going away. Is that more important than the safety of individuals? No. But should it be dismissed? No. Should those concerns be just ignored? No. They should and must be addressed. I don't know. I just, you hear something good today, like Brown University contributing 700 rooms in a dormitory for free use by medical professionals who are involved as first responders. And that's wonderful. And to the degree that the administration had any part in doing that, in if you will, soliciting the effort or working towards the effort, great. It still doesn't make up for the fact that most of us really have no clear idea what's going on and the real severity of it. And the problem is, in my opinion, a lot of people have lost faith in the ability of the governor and the Department of Health to actually deliver that information. They simply don't believe you anymore. Now, is that the natural, progression in a situation like this? Ultimately, probably yes. Is that exacerbated again by this tight rein on what's being done, how it's going to be done, where it's going to be done? Yes. Again, it's a recipe for failure. So, let's get together again in the next day or so. I mean, maybe we have to do our own little nightline every night on we call it COVID Nightline. Interesting enough, do you remember the show Nightline on on ABC networks?
Yeah, I do remember.
Okay. That show, a little trivia here, that show was started as a temporary show to report on the Iranian hostage crisis. The Iranian hostage crisis went on a whole hell of a lot longer than anybody anticipated. And eventually that show, Nightline, became part of the nightly lineup and just began to address other issues as well. So maybe you and I have to just do our own COVID Nightline. How's that? I'll come up with the name of a show. Actually, you're smarter than I am. You can come up with the name of a show. But let's do this routinely until this thing is figured out. Let's continue to have, and what I appreciate is from you, the professional as opposed to the emotional response. Someone who's actually looking at facts. Because, again, facts matter. Truth matters. And there is a truth and there are a set of facts. And they should be considered first. As opposed to, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Not that there isn't extreme value in I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Maybe we need to reach that as a state at some point, because for all the indignities foisted upon individual taxpayers and individual citizens in the state, it doesn't seem like there's any end to it. There's always an element of, can you top this? So, folks, where can folks find you, a good doctor? Where can they see you on the web? Where can they read about you? Where can they get a real sense of the man who is, in fact, Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz?
Yeah, you can reach me at real.luisdanielmunoz. So real.luisdanielmunoz on Facebook. You can also go to @4FOR Rhode Island. You can access a page that I have on Facebook with that. You can go to Twitter and access me at Luis Daniel Munoz, MUNOZ, and the O is a 0, and that would be my Twitter feed. I have been releasing articles recently and informative posts. At times there can be some delicately placed language and criticism around the administration's response, but for the most part, I really try to focus on facts and trying to again and just empower the community with an understanding both of the disease itself as well as health equity and some of the infrastructure changes we can make, especially at this time that we need. There's also, I use Medium for several op-eds. I'll be releasing one that I call Zero Sum Pandemonium, and it describes some of the challenges both at the federal and state level, and so that'll be released within the next day. So if you go to my pages, you will be able to access that article that is published on Medium through the page. And I'm always available for a Q&A, so if anyone has a question or feedback, always happy to entertain either. So thank you.
Excellent. We're going to try and get the Q&A cleaned up in terms of the technologies. They were probably missing a cable somewhere to connect all the different links. We'll get super producer Joel on it, on his magic mixing board. But at this moment, I want to thank anyone who's taken time tonight to listen. And of course, understand that the point here is to be outrage porn free while maintaining a strong element of civil disobedience. That is in our DNA. So at this moment, I sign off for the night. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network here at coalitionradionetwork.com. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Thank you very much for listening tonight. Have a wonderful evening. All right, Dr. Dan, I think we're going to put the magic, the mic is still hot. And we will sign off for tonight. Good night, folks.
Have a good night, Pat.
All right, buddy. I'll give you a very quick call right now after I shut things down.
Okay.